moving through talking about Peter before the resurrection. I've decided to talk about Peter after the resurrection, after Easter. And so there's some kids on the way out the door that will kind of give us a little breakdown about kind of the direction I'm going to go with this. And it'll be a good way to see kind of how Peter matures. I think it's a good term for it. Peter matures, right? I think we've seen, and today for sure, we'll see kind of a sense of Peter, maybe not necessarily in his best moments. And so I wanted to give you a little recap about where we've been. Jesus came to Simon. Jesus rescued Simon. Jesus is called the Christ. Simon is called the Peter, which means the rock. Good job. And then so there's a kind of a beauty there that, you know, Simon is called the Peter because Jesus hears him say, you know, this is, you know, who do you say I am? You know, I say you're the Christ, you're the Messiah. And Jesus says, you'll be the Peter. And then he says, but don't tell anybody yet. Don't tell anybody that what you think yet, Peter. And I think we're going to read a little bit about why my voice just changed octaves. Did you hear that?
Should have happened a couple of years ago.
I know, it should have happened. And so Jesus, but then there's this beautiful scene where Jesus washes Peter's feet. And then Simon is instructed to wash other people's feet. And because Simon at first kind of was a little resistant about Jesus doing that. And what I've noticed, and I've kind of, the more I've been studying this and looking at the scriptures I picked out for today, is that Simon has this tendency to, in his leadership, to try to set an example by almost being almost trying too hard to be a leader, right? I will be the one to take the sacrifice. You know, I think he's sometimes speaking out loud to try to be a leader among the people that are there rather than a follower of Christ. I think sometimes those of us that are leaders, if we try to lead without God in our lives, sometimes we just look like a fool. And Simon kind of did that. And so anyway, so I'll move on from that to begin kind of looking at where we're going to go next. So we're looking at John 13. So everybody pull out your Bible and look at John 13. If you don't have a Bible, then you must be the pastor. Let it bring my Bible up here. But we're just going to kind of peruse. We're not going to read just yet, but the things that are happening in John 13. So you might have heard me say that the book of John is not always in chronological order, right? They kind of put things together for the sake of teaching, right? I mean, it's kind of like I purposely taught last week on the subject of feet, right? We didn't go chronologically about that. We just talked about feet. And sometimes that's kind of what John does. John's kind of taken a subject that needs to be talked about, and then he just kind of expounds on it. And so John 13, we see that there's a foot washing going on, and then Jesus tells Judas, to go ahead and do what you're going to do. I mean, how hard that must be for him. Go ahead and do what you're going to do. So there's a beauty that exists there. So verse 31, I don't know why it gave me a teddy bear in the background, but I wasn't going to change it. So there's a teddy bear in the back of this one. But after Judas had gone out, somebody read for me after that. Jesus said, somebody start with Jesus says in verse 31 of chapter 13.
When he'd gone out, Jesus said, now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You should also love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another.
Okay, so what did you hear in this? Anything different that might stick out from the sermon I preached a couple of weeks ago about the greatest commandment? John says it a little different. What does he say? Verse 34.
You a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you.
Like the other one said, love your God with all your soul, with all your heart, with all your mind, love your neighbor as yourself. This one says, love as I have loved you. Right? And so right before this, Jesus has shown them the way to love, right? He loves Judas on the way out the door. He's just washed their feet. But love others as I loved you. And then everybody's going to know that you follow me, because the disciple is a follower, if you have love for one another. If you have love for one another. That's how people are going to know that you belong to me. And I say that right now because I think it's important here. Right? It's very important here. You know, we can get politicized often, right? We can get ourselves so caught in out of joint that we forget that most important thing that Jesus told us to do. People will know that you are Christian by your love. They'll know you're Christian by your love. But yet we get so disjointed, we get caught in the minutia, we get caught in this understanding that we can't love each other if there is an otherness that exists there. Which is ironic because of something that will happen in just a minute. But this kind of leads us up. They're going to know that you're my disciples if you have love for one another. All right. Moving on. Somebody read to me.
Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow me afterward. Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the cock crows, you will have denied me 3 times.
All right. So what'd you hear? There's a lot to packed into those 3 verses, isn't there?
It's telling you what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, where are you going? Right? Where are you going? And Jesus says, you can't go where I'm going now, but you will eventually be able to go there. We don't know if he's talking about death. We don't know if he's talking about resurrection. We don't know if he's talking about an ascension. We don't know if he's talking about heaven. We don't know if he's talking about hell. We don't really know exactly what he's talking about. But there needs to be time because there's a maturation process that needs to happen, A. B, Peter's needed. I'm not done with you yet. And Peter says, I'll lay down my life for you. Which Jesus should be saying, do you remember I told you to lay down your life and pick up your cross and follow me? Like I've already told you to do that. Like you're waiting until now to do it. You know, you're kind of late to the game there. But Jesus says, no. You're not ready. You're not ready. I mean, I think this is kind of the ongoing message for Peter, right? Peter, you're not yet ready to walk on water because once you get out here, you're going to doubt, you're going to sink. Peter, you're not yet ready, but so don't tell anybody what you said about me being the Messiah. Peter, you're not yet ready. You're not yet ready. And you know, I'm okay with this. Not the denying part, but the I'm not ready yet aspect. Because one of my favorite scriptures of Revelation is God talking about I'm the Alpha and the Omega, right? But one of my favorite sermons I ever heard was, but don't forget about the beta, gamma, and delta, because you can't get from the beginning to the end without all the stuff in the middle. Don't forget about everything else. There's still work to be done. So there's you know, we're not done, but you have to learn, right? Very truly, I tell you, before the cock crows, that's metaphor for the new day coming, right? You will have denied me 3 times.
Is there a chance Peter, after the washing of the feet, finally obeyed? And maybe it was like Jesus telling him, this is what I want you to do.
I don't know. We are to assume that this is going on in the same room. This is in the same pericope. Pericope meaning same group of scriptures, right? Same pericope, same setting as the foot washing. So there is a sense of, the feet have just been washed. Now do this for others. And so Peter has already pushed back. No, not, you don't wash my feet. I'm not worthy. Well, if you're going to wash my feet, go ahead and wash all of them. So, Peter is kind of making that broad proclamation, right? That outward, oh, but Lord, let me show you the example. Wash my feet as well as the rest of me, trying to, I like to think he's a little bit theatrical with his words. But we are still assuming they're in the room, but how would it make you feel if somebody came up to you and said, no, you're gonna deny me? I know you.
I don't know, I feel like it's almost like a parent, because I've done that to my own son. Like, we'll talk about things, and try to learn things, and then he'll argue.
Yeah.
And I just sit back and he'll look at me as, I'm gonna say the words, aren't I, Mom?
Yeah.
Yes, you are, but that's okay.
You're still gonna, yeah. You are gonna mess up, kid.
Yeah, and that's how I see this also with Jesus saying, you're not ready yet.
Yeah.
Like being almost like a parent, I can see.
Right.
But that carrot is on before him.
Yeah, you had that carrot.
Yeah.
And there's there are times in which, the obvious is stated to all of us in some way, right? You are going to get sick. Like during COVID, all of us pretty much knew at some time, most of us anyway, we're probably going to get it at some time. I didn't get it till I started here, so thanks a lot, guys. I haven't been able to hear since. But I've never gotten it until I got here. But at some time you were going to get it. At some time we're all going to get a cold, right? At some time, no matter what you do, there's going to be an inevitable. And so there's almost like this was an inevitable, but it's also a prediction. Like, hey, man, like you're going to deny me 3 times.
Mhm.
You're gonna, like you're not ready to lay down your life on me because you're not even willing to make that next step. Like you can't lay down your life on me because you still got a whole lot of learning to do, but you got a whole lot of being human to do before you can become divine. Which I've always thought it was funny that a pastor has a master's of divinity, right? That's what my master's degree is in divinity. So therefore, I've apparently mastered the divine. But the main lesson I learned in seminary is that I don't know anything. You get to seminary and basically you learn that after 3 years and multiple tests and exams. The best part about being a Christian is you don't have to know it all. So anyway, there is in literature, I'm going to get a little nerdy on you real quick. In the ancient Mediterranean world, there were last testaments of famous people, mostly men, because that was a patriarchal age. Joshua, David, and Jacob are some we see in the Old Testament. But what it does is it's a gathering of it's telling the last days of a person, and they're often written very similarly. There's a lot of similarities that happen. People gather. There's an announcement of death. There's blessing and prophecies. There's the review of life, and then there's the name of its successor. Think about Moses. Moses names Joshua as the successor. There's a David essentially is naming his son as successor. I mean, there's a name of that. There's a gathering of people in which there's kind of a send off, right? In literature, you can go back and look at some of the great philosophers. Same sort of thing. And so many think that the writer of John is doing that with Jesus, which is why they kind of coupled a lot of these stories together in this one place, is to give Jesus a send-off. But the successor has been named. The successor, the rock of the church, and he's not yet ready, which is why many people think that there was then the proclamation of you need the Holy Spirit to help you along with this as well. So, hello, friends. What's the best thing that happened to you this week?
I'm retired.
You ate me.
You fixed dinner.
She made dinner for me.
Yeah, how did you not know that?
Bob, you're done there, Alice.
Okay.
You got to sit by Penny.
I told what to do on myself.
That's right. So what we've been doing is we're kind of looking at the prediction that Jesus has made to Peter. And we're talking about a farewell discourse, which is a tool used by ancient authors to really kind of give the life story of somebody. And so some people would look at Peter as being the successor. Some people look at the Holy Spirit as being the successor. Luke, of course, focuses more on the Holy Spirit. John is kind of looking at the idea of Peter might be that successor, but that successor is not yet ready. And so the final discourse is interrupted, if you will. But anyway, thank you for letting me nerd out about what a farewell discourse really is. All right, let's go to John 18. Skip ahead a couple of chapters there. Because if you look, you'll see that kind of discourse kind of happening as we lead up to Jesus' death. So let's get to John 8, 5b through 11. So that means start with the word Judas in verse 5.
Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," they stepped back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you are looking for me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken. "I did not lose a single one of those whom you gave to me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's slave, and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?"
The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
All right, so couple of things. I'll go to the next slide here. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it is Judas who initiates the arrest. What does he do in those stories that you know? What does he do to show that it's Jesus?
Kisses.
He gives him a kiss. And John, well, I wanted to read this from John. Jesus turns himself in. And it just simply shows that Judas standing there with the others. Because in the Gospel of John, the writers of John were quick to make a they and them, and us and them concept. They were already making Judas part of the crowd. Judas, who had just been in that upper room in chapter 13, was now with the other people. He's already just part of them, which is a huge, huge deal. That it shows just how quickly that happened. But B, because of the idea that the Gospel of John was all about making it an us and them sort of thing, right? The Johannine community was about people being, they believed in the minute you believed, you started your eternal life, which is where John 3:16 came from. But if you ever left them, if you ever decided to have doubts against their teachings, you were a them. And so they're showing a they and them on the outside. Gospel of John is a beautiful writing, but it can be used and has been used as an abusive text as well, because of the they and themness that exists. In fact, this is the Gospel of John was the gospel that most Nazis used in the 30s and 40s for anti-Semitism, because it was a they and them. Unfortunately, there's a they and themness that exists. And so we have to be careful. I want to bring that out, not to say bad on John, because I don't think the writers of John were doing that for any mean reason, but it can be used as a weapon. So I know you guys are smarter than that, but there's a sense of that can be done, but it shows Judas as a them, as an outsider already, because of what he's done. And he's not even kissed Jesus in this. And so that exists there. There's also Peter stepping up as the spokesperson again, right? That drama that exists. He's not yet ready to tell people that Jesus is the Messiah. Remember, Jesus said, don't tell them that I'm the Messiah. John is the only one to show Simon as the one who struck the arrestor. The other times in which is written in the Synoptic Gospels, Peter's name is not given, but it shows that, and then in the other ones, it actually shows him striking the ear of a soldier. This shows him striking the ear of what? A servant, yeah. And so Peter strikes him. But one of the commentators I was reading made Kim, kind of to your point earlier, made a comparison between this and the foot washing. Because what does he do? He has a false humility, right? No, don't wash me. I'm going to cut your ear off. Kind of this, kind of, I don't know. I like to.
Oh, Peter.
Oh, Peter, right now. But he sliced that ear off. I'm going to show them. I'm going to make sure I'm part of this. But some say that he's trying to overdo his leadership, right? He's trying to overdo it. He's very performative in his leadership, if you will. So anyway, anybody else hear anything else that you want to draw our attention to? I'm trying to get through a whole lot today just because we have a week. Like, it's not going to be right to talk about this after Easter.
Well, it would be just like Peter after getting his feet washed and having Jesus tell him this is what you're going to do, and he's sitting there. I don't think so.
Right.
Yeah, right. You're wrong. And so he overreacts. He says, "I'll show you. You think I'm going to deny you?"
Right.
Slice.
Yeah. When he already said, like, Jesus already told him back in, when Jesus told him, "Get behind me, Satan," it was because, that was one of the first times that Jesus says, "I'm going to have to die. I'm going to have to die." And then one of my favorite parts is this last part right here. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me? What does he say in the garden? "Oh, Father, take this cup from me." Right. So am I not to drink of that cup? Remember when they were talking about a few weeks ago, we talked about John and James, the sons of Zebedee, following behind Jesus and arguing about if they could have a hand, if they could sit on the right hand or the left hand. And and Jesus said to him, "Are you ready to drink from that same cup that I'm drinking from? Are you ready to drink from that same cup?" This is the cup he's talking about. Are you ready to make those sacrifices? Are you ready to have people doubt your faith? Are you ready for these things?
And wait till you figure out what it is.
What's that?
And I think there was like, wait till you figure out what it is.
Yeah.
Because when he came, everybody thought he was going to come and wipe out everything and put everything right. And suddenly they put all the trust, everything they were doing to him. Suddenly they're going to have to follow him to the cross.
Right. Absolutely.
What a shock.
Well, and this week, so this week we talked about the triumphant entry, right? Palm Sunday doesn't take place at the front gate of the city. Jesus is coming through the back gate. And the people that are at the back gate of the city welcoming Jesus are the ones that the people at the front gate had forgotten. They thought that he'd be coming in on a royal steed. Instead, he came riding in on a donkey that was many people considered stolen. You notice in 2 Gospels, Jesus doesn't ask permission to take that donkey from that man. They just go and take it. And so Jesus is riding on a stolen donkey sometimes. So anyway, all right. Chapter 18, verses 15 through 18.
Speak up at once.
I'll read.
I'll do it again.
Oh, do it, Bob. You got the dramatic reading. I like it.
Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went in with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter was standing outside at the gate. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the woman who guarded the gate, and brought Peter in. The woman said to Peter, "You are not also one of these men's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing around it and warming themselves. Peter also was standing with them and warming himself.
What'd you hear?
Denial.
The thing is, this is the only denial in John.
Oh, is it?
The only denial in John. But Peter denies it. But you are not also one of the man's disciples, are you? And he's supposed to be the leader of the disciples. And he's denying even, are you one of them? Secondly, at the very end of it, notice what they do with the character of Peter. They do what they did with Judas. They put him as part of the crowd. Peter simply blends in to the background. He warms himself with everybody else. Peter is again just becoming somebody else. So it shows that without Peter, without Jesus, Peter's lost, right? Notice how John makes Peter to be simply part of the crowd, but then compare that to Luke 22. I'm going to pull that out and I'll read it to you real fast. This is another example of him doing this. Somebody called me from Vietnam. Does anybody order any Vietnamese food or anything? No? Okay, I'm gonna ignore it. 22, 54 through 62. Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. But Peter was following at a distance. When they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him in the firelight, stared at him and said, "This man is also with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." A little later, someone else, on seeing Peter, said, "You are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." Then about an hour later, still another kept insisting, "Surely this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean." But Peter says, "Man, I do not know what you're talking about." At that moment, while he was still speaking, the cock crowed. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. So 3 times in Luke, but Jesus looked at him. Imagine that scene. Jesus looked at him. I don't know him. Right? It's like, I can imagine a couple of times when I would go to the mall and then I'd see my parents and I'd pretend I didn't see them. Right? Or I had kids that I used to be able to go to eat lunch. I was a youth director and I would go eat lunch with some of my students at the various schools. And one time I went And I'm sitting at the table that I normally ate at with my friend Nick Snyder. And his best friend Christian, who came to my youth group every now and then, came over and sat with me. He said, "Rob, I'm sorry, Nick won't be joining us today. He's sitting with his girlfriend." And anyway, he said, he asked that you don't talk to him. So, and then I went to the mall later on. I saw another one of my youth, and he took off running the other way. And so, anyway, but it's kind of one of those things where I don't know you, and then like you look at him, and I mean, I don't know him, and I don't know what I mean. Peter knew he couldn't do anything to stop it, right? He tried to stop earlier by cutting out the ear. It didn't work, but he tried to stop it. So I mean, he's in this conundrum. Do I do it? Because what's going to happen? Like, are they going to expect me to stop him? Are they going to hurt me? You know, there's this kind of sense of it. Jesus has already told them, don't tell anybody that you call me Messiah. Don't tell anybody. And so I'm wondering if Peter's taking that seriously at this moment too. You know, there's a sense of like, and what am I supposed to do, Jesus? Like, you told me not to tell anybody you're the Messiah. Now do I deny you? Do I decline knowing you? What do you think?
I think he was afraid.
You think he was afraid?
Or he knows he'd be immediately arrested or something, and then he wouldn't be able to help Jesus if there happened to be a window.
Right, because he likes to help.
I also think it's like when it happens to you yourself, it's like you just like getting called out. I just see what you're saying now. Now I know what you meant.
Right.
That person looking right at you going, now I know what you meant. You were right.
Yeah.
I did do that.
Like the other day, I let somebody turn. I did one of these in traffic, and the person turned. Well, then the person after her decided to turn too, and a guy I was in the right lane. The guy in the left lane kept going. They had a wreck, and I'm like, so I got out of the car, went and told people, like, hey, you know, I let the person. Is this my fault? Like, you know, like no, it's not your fault. Like, you know, she shouldn't have turned. But you know, it's one of these things. It's like I was kind of in that moment. Like, what do I do? Do I just keep going? I mean, you know, like you know, or like whenever you see something, you're in this kind of frozen moment, and Peter is in this frozen moment, right? Where I can imagine that, you know, I'm pretty sure Peter had dark skin, but like if he were our shade, what color would he turn? You know, is he sheet white or is he bright red? You know, or is he purple? From the look that's on his face. I mean, imagine looks on his face. Imagine the sweat in his palms. Imagine the taste in his mouth, and then imagine the sense of getting caught. And are those tears of sadness, or are those tears of embarrassment, or are those tears of grief, right? There's a lot to be put in there, because this is grief that adds to it, right? Not only is he going to lose his best friend, not is he only going to lose his teacher, not only is he going to lose the one that called him Messiah, he's going to lose the one that gave him any sort of credit at all. This person finally gave him credit and saw something within him, and now he's going to lose that. But then there's a second sense of grief that comes in behind that is part guilt. That's unfinished business. That's an unfinished conversation, right? Oh. And so when we think of Holy Week, it's that pregnant pause that I want us to imagine. That unfinished conversation. That, yes, Easter leads us to hopeful optimism. But there is a poignant scene right here with Peter of him going off and crying that makes me wonder if that's not where we should be during Holy Week. Before we can truly celebrate the resurrection, to find that space within our own selves where we say, what would I have done?
I feel guilty listening to it.
Yeah.
I feel horrible. I can't imagine it.
Yeah.
Plus, as a leader, you just let everybody down.
Yeah.
So you add that to it too.
Right. And that's That's my biggest fear as a leader. Letting everybody down.
And saying, I was such a jerk.
Yeah, I was a jerk. I mean, everybody looks at you, right? I'm only leading 507 of you or however many people belong to this church. And like, I mean, I'm all the time, like, you know, asking Tracy, like, am I good enough? You know, there's a sense of like wondering, right? I mean, what have I done? How can I do this? You know, and then the worry that exists in my previous church when I'm getting just horror stories about what's happening over there. And the hurt that happens when I know somebody in this church is hurt because of something that might have been done even before I got here. There's a great pause that exists in the, if I try to do it by myself. Because Peter without Jesus is just like any of us when we try to do it without Jesus. Because I then, as a leader of this church, turn to Jesus, turn to Christ, and realize it was he that led me here. It was he that has helped me get through the point. It was he who I followed. And as long as I know I'm doing that as faithfully as I can, I know that I'm making the right steps. I'm doing the right things. I'm doing what I can do. So anyway.
I think too often we jump from Palm Sunday to Easter and we don't actually live Holy Week and what that meant to Jesus.
Yep.
I've always felt that if you can't celebrate Easter without having celebrated Good Friday.
Right.
Exactly.
What are those moments leading up? Which is why I've wanted to do this study before Easter. Because I think Peter is every one of us. We get so mad at Peter because Peter is us. Peter wants to be more than he is and more than he's capable of being. Peter wants to do it alone. Peter wants to be so much more. But Peter needs to be reminded that every time Jesus has met him where he was. Peter met him in his mother-in-law's house when she was dying. Jesus met him in his boat when he was at work. Jesus met him in the middle of that storm when the boat was being tossed to and fro.
Now, they didn't know that Jesus was going to be crucified. I mean,
He said he was going to die. They knew he was going to die, but they didn't know about the resurrection.
they didn't know how horrible the death was going to be.
Well, that was hard for them to swallow, Nancy, the fact that he was going to die. Right? And he's watching him, right? And Luke, he sees him in this poignant scene of bleeding and walking by. He sees him look at him as though he's staring right into his soul. There's a poignant scene that exists right there. If you could pause a moment in history and just take that moment, and it becomes real to Peter that he really is dying. They've just beaten him. They've just arrested him. There is a poignant scene in knowing he's been saying the whole time, I'm not going to let you die. Jesus has mentioned that I'm going to be resurrected, but Peter keeps saying, I'm not going to let that happen because he's not looking past the death part. He's trying to fix what he can fix, as we saw at the top of the mountain. Go ahead, Ed.
Peter.
What?
We're all Peter, right?
So,
I
Peter,
think it'd be interesting to try to figure out here, what should he have done?
right? What do you think, Ed? You're on
Well,
session,
what it comes
okay?
down to is, I think we're all guilty of it, we probably didn't have the courage to do what he knew he had to do. And that might have been part of the reason why he was crying also,
Right.
because he knew he should do such and such, but he didn't have the stomach to do that, and the backbone to do that.
Yeah,
Right.
the courage to take a sword out, cut off an ear.
He knew to take the sword out, right?
So, yeah, French soldiers.
Yeah, but humans don't always have hindsight until after the fact.
Yeah,
And you can say, I should have done this, or I should have done that. And how many times raising kids, things happen, other little kids are mean to them or whatever, you don't say anything right away. Because you're waiting for them to learn and for the proper moment.
I think sometimes we use that as an excuse.
Yeah.
Well, our humanness is a problem.
Yeah.
If we don't have God in our life, we can't make those right decisions. We can wish we would. We
Right.
Wish we try as hard as we can, but without him, we cannot make them.
And even then, we try on our own, we sometimes fail. I mean, this makes me think of silent denials sometimes. You know, there was one time a while ago that I remember, there was a group chat and somebody said something along the lines of Christians are weak-minded. You know, and I remained silent. And after the fact, I kind of beat myself up on, why didn't I speak up? Why did I remain silent? It was a perfect opportunity.
Right.
You know, but it's a silent denial. It's kind of the same thing. I don't
Yeah.
know if I was feeling like he did or not, but.
Turning a blind eye.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a, and so I think that there's a bit of that confusion there too. I'm wondering if Peter, right, we have all these emotions that happen all at one time, that we have paralysis by overanalysis. Has anybody ever had paralysis by overanalysis? You know, do what?
My golf.
Your golf swing, well, you got a better one than me, Ed. But like, you know, sometimes it's, you know, I remember, you know, I've been in session meetings where it's like, they're looking like, all right, pastor, what are you thinking? I'm like, you know, like, you don't know what to say. And, you know, but there's a paralysis of overanalysis because you get caught in that middle. And so Jesus told Peter, don't tell anybody I'm the Messiah. Don't try to fix things. You're going to deny me. And I don't know, but then when he says, I don't know the man, that's the hard part. So anyway.
I'm curious though, John knew the priest and went right into the church and then came out and got Peter. Why wasn't it an issue that he was a disciple to the priest?
It might have been, he might have simply been meaning, hey, are you one of them? You know, are you going in there? I mean, it wasn't it didn't mean that it was a mean thing. It didn't mean that they were trying to trap him. And John, it doesn't sound like they're trying to trap him.
Well, it says the priest and him were basically friends. They
Yeah.
knew each other.
Yeah, to
And
that.
so why wasn't it an issue that he was a disciple to that priest? When they
Well, it was the
would've-
woman. It wasn't the high priest. It was the woman who guarded the gate and brought Peter in. So they had already said, come on in. And then the woman standing there, she's the guard of the gate. And the woman talks to Peter, but not to John. So you are not also one of the man's disciples, are you? So I don't know. That's a great question. It could be that there's no malicious attack at all on Peter in this way. Maybe it's simply anyway, I don't know. These three stories are perhaps the most humanizing of Peter of all. Jesus sees what Peter is capable of as a follower, quoting the rock, and sees what he is capable of when he tries to do it on his own. You're the rock when I'm with you. You're not the rock without me. It's kind of like what would happen if the church forgot about Jesus and tried to do it on her own. That would never happen, right? Peter tries to interrupt a lot of times, and Peter tries to shirk responsibility. I do all three of these things. I try to interrupt the plan that God has for me because I'm done with wherever I am. Right? I remember there was, I think back to times in which I took a job, and I almost think that I was trying to interrupt the call that God had on my life to get that job. God still used me in that place, but it wasn't. I look now and I think that I might have written the story. God still used me. But then there's the shirking of responsibility, right? That we've all talked about. Well, God calls me to feed the hungry. Well, I might not have time. God calls me to visit the lonely. Well, I might not have time. God calls me to bring drink to the thirsty. I might not have time. God calls me to paint the church. I might not have time. God calls me to sit through another one of Rob's sermons. I might not have the energy. These sort of things. God told me to call somebody. Well, I don't have minutes on my phone, right? God called me to, you insert what it is God's called you to do and the excuse you've used. That's Peter. So, all right, art time. I got two today. What do you see?
Agony.
Agony. What do you think is happening?
He just
Seemed
cut off
right.
that man's ear, the slave's ear.
Mm-hmm.
He already has a tear in his eye.
Or he has a tear in his eye.
I can't see who's behind him.
Can't see. Yeah, I don't really know who's behind him either. But
Living with his guilt.
oh, there's police officers behind him.
Focuses on his face.
No, it looks like it's reaching through the sword. Right at the bottom, letting it sword.
Yeah, is he reaching forward or is he dropping it? Yeah.
Well, one side is flowers and the other side is fire.
Yeah. So I'll read you what she said. Pressed in by soldiers and religious leaders surrounded by lanterns, torches, and weapons, Peter does what many of us would do. He responds to the threat of violence with violence. With sword in hand, he tries to take the unfolding narrative into his own hands and cuts off Malchus's ear. Jesus tells Peter to put the sword back in its sheath. This is the moment I wanted to capture in this image. I imagine a rush of emotion surge through Peter's body like a bolt of lightning. I imagine he feels the sting of a shame after being admonished by his teacher for his violent actions. I imagine he feels the searing grief that comes with the realization that his teacher and friend will in fact die, and he is helpless to do anything about it. Perhaps the most painful of all. Peter had a choice. He could continue down the path of violence, fight the soldiers and religious leaders and protect Jesus from the inevitable, or he could yield, dropping his sword and surrendering to the cup that God has placed before his friend. In the image, this choice is suspended in time. Is Peter releasing the sword and choosing the way of peace, or is Peter about to take up the sword and choose the way of violence? Good job, Nancy. On the left is the image leaves from the garden's olive grove reach out to shade and comfort him. This is the way of peace. On the right, the soldiers are looming with the flames closing in around him. This is the way of violence. Peter releases the sword as if it was on fire, as hot tears of shame, grief, and helplessness pour down his face. Which way will we choose? So thanks to Lauren Wright Pittman, fellow Columbia Theological Seminary graduate, for that picture. All right, last one.
You know, it's kind of interesting, look at all of the medieval paintings. And whenever they showed one of the saints, they have symbols. So Peter was always shown holding his keys, but I don't recall ever seeing one with keys and a sword.
Wow. So he dropped it. Wow. Good point. Thank you, Bob.
I think maybe that's just a doctrine too difficult to swallow.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I never thought about this until just this moment, though. That's the one time he stood out and did something. He denied on the other three, but he finally did something, and then it was wrong.
Yeah. Right. Right. All right. What do we see here?
Many faces.
It's right.
What was that?
It's gotta be Ringo.
Oh, it's Ringo up there. It's the Beatles. I love it. I don't know if Denise Anderson.
But it's all the emotions.
Yeah, the
I mean, there's
different
anger
emotions.
and worry and
Surprise.
sadness and
Right.
Fear.
surprise, yeah.
Fear.
The lower figure looks like he wants to be rid of all that there.
Mm,
Ignore it. Maybe it'll go away.
right.
These are the disciples, four of the disciples.
They're all Peter.
Oh, they're all here.
Yeah.
It's called the descent.
It's all the way he feels.
Yeah.
Astonishment, anguish.
Yeah.
Future,
Despair.
and yeah.
So she says, I love portraiture and textiles, but until now, I've never married those two things. At the time of this piece's creation, I'd been doing a lot of sewing, particularly of Stoll's investments. When it came to choosing a medium for this collaboration, fabric would not let me go. It makes sense that as we consider the interweaving of Peter's own story with that of the crucifixion, the medium for this piece would be itself be woven. What must Peter have felt in those fateful moments of betrayal? Here I try to capture his initial paralysis when he first asked if he's one of Jesus' disciples. When Jesus was arrested, Peter had only begun to see the full extent of the empire's cruelty. Would they do to me what they've done to him? He must have asked himself. Maybe he could be so zealous for Jesus in the past because it was all an abstraction. Now things have gotten frighteningly real. From there, Peter descends into more fear, the kind that does not help us to be our best selves. I depict him going from stunned to defensive and then to belligerent, navigating the full spectrum of the fight, flight, or freeze responses to a perceived threat. By the time the cock crows, as Jesus predicted, see if you can make out the bird's faint silhouette in the right lower hand corner. Oh, there's yeah. I think like the black and white. See if I can make it bigger.
Oh, I see.
See it?
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, sorry. But Peter probably no longer recognizing himself. He must feel deflated and ashamed. At the end of his descent, he is different. So I depict him differently from his 3 prior denials. He has much less fire in his countenance and can't even open his eyes to face what he's done. The flames recall the fire where Peter warmed himself, but they also represent purification and illumination. Peter is forced to see himself as he truly is, as Jesus had already shown him. Who will he choose to be after this? When we are confronted with those we truly are, who will we choose to be after that confrontation? As we look at Peter's journey, it is my prayer that we'll consider and meditate on our own. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. My friends, who are we praying for today? I will stop this. Thank you, whoever's on YouTube or Zoom. Nobody. Okay.